Alright, guys. Today we're going to talk about environments. Now, environments is a pretty technical topic, and you may think that a business analyst or PM isn't involved in those things. They're more architecture related. But in fact, knowing the environments and having that verbiage and even understanding at least the high level of what happens where definitely provides strengths because environments are constantly discussed. They're a part of planning and understanding, what the different environments do is key. So what I mean by environments are like areas that people or developers essentially are going to be working in, developers or testers, right? So at the highest level, let's build an ideal environment setup. Environments is another thing that really varies everywhere you go. If someone starts grilling you on environments, you can really kind of say that this is the specific type of setup you have because no one can really challenge that. The environment setups are really based on need as against, cost and resources. So if you have the money for it, then yeah, you're going to stand up a bunch of environments and have a more secure system. But realistically, you're only going to have, one or two environments that are going to basically do everything. What do I mean by environments? Let's get into it. So the most common and the main environment that you're going to have at everywhere you go is production, right? So production is live. It's being used by the users. There's usually a team that's maintaining its what's the word I'm looking for? Its liveliness. Like it has to be live, it has to be running, it has to be on at the right time. So production's gonna have teams that keep it running and whatnot. I know I'm repeating myself, but this is like the highest environment that everybody kind of puts most of its concentration on, right? Right under production, you're going to have a UAT environment. So this is a environment that's like production, has most of the changes merged together, but it's just not being used by the actual users. It's used for acceptance testing or different types of testing. Another thing they call this environment is stage. So this is basically an environment that's production-like, but is not production. So prod-like. Okay. This also has the most resources, meaning both technical resources, meaning the computer processing power that you're throwing at it, as well as the people that are looking after it. This has the highest precedence. Then you have UAT, which is prod-like, but not quite prod. It's used mostly for testing. Then below UAT or stage, you have basically a test environment. So this is where you're gonna, internal. We don't call it. Let's just call it test teams, test environment. This is where the test team is gonna test their changes. It's an environment before UAT. This environment is not going to be prod-like, because what you're going to do is you're going to try to isolate the environment here to test the specific change. And then below test, you have a dev environment, which is where development occurs. So development occurs in the dev environment. That's where dev is often testing. Now there's a theory of testing here that's important to understand. When the developers are going to develop, they're going to unit test. And what unit testing is if you build a piece of code, a small fragment of it, you make sure that small fragment works. Because if you build up too many fragments and then you start testing, you're not going to be able to get down to if you have an issue, you're not going to be able to get down to what's causing an issue. So this is where dev occurs. This is unit testing, right? And this is system testing. Okay. Now, when I talk about isolating an item to be able to test it, oftentimes you're going to have like more than one developer, right? So suppose you have dev 1 here and dev 2 here, and the two developers that are working on two different things. When they promote, they can move up to test, and they got to manage. Not just they, like usually the PM has got to manage what changes are coming up, because if they basically affect each other, then you got to know that there's impacts. If you have one set of code that has a certain functionality and another set of code that doesn't, you're trying to test certain things. You got to know which ones to promote. If they're dependent on each other, now you have to finish 2 dev items to be able to test them. So you got to watch the impacts, even though these are separated environments. When the way you promote them, the strategy in promoting them, it's that's something that has to be managed. Usually an architect can manage that, but really the person that knows the requirements and knows what's due and when is going to be able to best prioritize how you guys will be promoting code. You hear of things like branches. So branches are just usually multiple environments within a single dev environment. That's again just developers working in their own branch and then promoting code to specific environments we brought up, right? So this is kind of ideal. Another environment that you might have I've seen is called demo. This is a prod-like environment where it's used for demoing to the business users, or this one is going to work the best because it doesn't have every single scenario of data thrown at it. It has like the happy path data thrown at it, so it's meant to kind of work correctly, right? Another thing you'll notice is that these, if you kind of look at this is actually the last few phases of SDLC. If you put planning, requirements, and design, then you go to dev, test, UAT, and production, right? So this kind of mocks that, and it's important to understand, what you do in which environment and when, right? So, for example, if you are in UAT, you're just about to deploy, you've gone through most of your testing, the system is mostly stable, right? And you encounter a major bug in UAT, where do you apply the fix? Do you go back to dev, promote it up, right? And then go to production? That's the ideal scenario. That's how it's supposed to always be promoted upward. But if you're in UAT, the thing is due tomorrow and you don't have time to, stabilize all those environments, retest it again and move up, then you're going to make your changes right in UAT, make sure you got it right, and then you promote that code up, right? So then UAT and production will have the right code, and these sub-prod environments didn't get the updated, whatever issue you had, whatever update your fix you provided, these two environments aren't going to have those updates, right? And that's often what happens. Production and UAT are going to have the latest and greatest sets of code, and these two get outdated over time as multiple releases occur, multiple things happen. These get out of sync. Sometimes that's why you jump into these environments and start testing something, and it's not even possible because the code's not there. So an often practice that you hear about in any implementation is QA refreshes, where you take higher environment data and metadata and all the stuff that's configured around it, and then you bring it down to your lower environment so that the latest changes have been brought down, and then you can start development on things. So these are they seem all technical, but as you're planning something, these are important things to know. Like if I know a change is in prod, not in dev, and I'm asking my dev to start something, they start telling me about how those changes aren't there, then it's just a matter of, all right, what does the QA refresh, tasks look like? It's 4 days to refresh it, great. 4 days later, you can start dev. So it's all about understanding what these issues really mean in these various environments and how to kind of manage them, whether you're the technical resource or not. Now, this is kind of like an ideal setup here. Let's call this ideal. And over here, what's most often going to happen is you have prod and you have QA. That's most of where I've gone. That's been the environment setup, where you have developers developing right in the QA environment, QA teams test it, and they have to basically talk to each other to make sure they're not touching each other's code, and moving things up. Now, if you're agile and you have a bunch of little tickets going on, and things are interdependent, you're gonna have it's gonna look more like this. Waterfall, it looks it it ends up looking more like this because you're able to manage all your changes because of the scope being so kind of defined up front. You're able to kind of assess those impacts to existing code or other in-flight code, based on kind of your environment. Versus in agile, you're going to need a more robust setup to be able to handle the so many changes that are constantly in flight and going back to test, moving up, things like that. So that is what environments are: prod, QA, or prod, stage, test, and dev. There's so many variations, and there's a lot of different theories around this. Cheers.